job, I thought, was to be cool, calm, and collected and help him make tough decisions. The president's in Shanksville right now. I remember when the president was on the phone with the vice president, and the vice president was asking if the president would authorize our fighter jet pilots to shoot down commercial jetliners. I suspect Vice President Cheney already gave the order, but I did hear the president confirm that he would give the order to do that. When the president hung up the phone, he leaned forward to me and he says, "I was an Air National Guard pilot. I can't imagine receiving that order." I was very impressed that he had empathy for those who would have to carry out mandates that he would put out there. And it just demonstrated to me that he was truly empathetic as a leader rather than a commander. And so it was
he was empathetic for the people.
For me to see how the president really stepped
like
up.
a couple days later, he's standing there with that megaphone, saying, "These people," he's saying, "We can all hear you."
Bob Mueller had only been the FBI director for 10 days. And so he was focused on, number one, there was going to be a consequence. But number two, what are we doing to prevent whatever comes next? So what are we going to do to prevent what could be coming next? How are we going to build a coalition to respond? What should our response be? And I was just very impressed. He was not the least bit selfish that day. He was completely engaged in trying to do the right thing.
Mr. Secretary, every year I vow not to re-immerse myself into all the reading and all the documentaries about what happened here. And every year I fall into the same pattern. And every year I remind myself of the timeline. This is the incredible part to me regarding your role in this. And I want to hear about the infrastructure behind the scenes. As you've been talking, we saw some of the photos of the makeshift office area that follows when the White House is on the road. 903.
Yes.
It's hell on earth here. The second tower has been hit. When you famously leaned over to whisper in the president's ear, it's 905. Most of us mortals are still processing, wait a minute, this isn't an accident anymore. Talk about the infrastructure you had around you that allowed you, in the elapsed time of 2 minutes, to go out and tell the leader of the free world what had happened here.
Candidly, chiefs of staff have to make decisions all day long. Does the president need to know?
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people come breathlessly into the chief of staff. So I'm going to see the president right now. So I wrestled with that after, Navy Captain Deb Lauer came to me. She was the acting national security advisor on the trip, the director of the White House Situation Room. She went on to become an admiral, one of the first admirals in the Navy. And she is the one that told the president it appeared to be a small twin-engine prop plane, told me that it was a commercial jetliner, and then said, "Oh my God, another plane." And that's when I stood there and I actually said to myself, does the president need to know? Yes, he does. What do I say? I wanted to be very efficient with my words. I knew that it was not a coincidence or an accident. The two planes hit the World Trade Center towers. I knew that, and I'll glad to raise my hand and swear on a stack of Bibles that that's what it was. I used the word attack because it had to have been planned. Had to have been planned. What we haven't had in this country is the nature of an attack that didn't come from a foreign state. This came from a group of terrorists. I thought about UBL, Osama bin Laden. I knew about Al Qaeda. I know about the attacks on the World Trade Center in February of 1993. So yes, I had put that all together, and I stood at the door and reflected on it. Candidly, I also reflected on another moment that both of you will remember. I was the acting chief of staff for the first President Bush when he threw up on the Japanese prime minister in Tokyo.
Remember that?
And I said, everybody's going to think the president's dying. I took out my little laminated card as a deputy White House chief of staff, but the acting chief of staff for the trip, and said, I'm going to do everything on this card that it says to do in case. And I said, today with President Bush, I'm going to do everything I can consistent with my obligation to help him make tough decisions. And I tried to do that. Yes, we had firm arguments and conversations. We should have, candidly, because the decisions should not be easy. If you're making a presidential decision, it should be a hard decision. The president had to make hard decisions. I do think it's appropriate for people to question what we did and how we did it. I accept that. I'm the one who made the decision not to just go in and pull him out of the chair and say, come with me. I was pleased how he reacted because I don't think he did introduce fear to those young students. I don't think he demonstrated fear to the media. And they would have loved to have had a picture of fear, but the terrorists would have most desired it.
Oh, they would have gobbled that up. They saw that.
So I think the president reacted very well. I was also grateful that he sat there for several minutes, and it was about 7.5 minutes. Didn't seem that long to me, but it gave me a chance to get things done in that little room where the staff was. I could say, get the FBI director on the phone, get a line open to the vice president, line open to the Situation Room, get Mark Tillman and the staff, and the crew back on Air Force One, get the Secret Service to turn the motorcade around. Darren Bartlett, get some remarks written for the president, and don't have him say anything we do not know to be the truth. And then the president walked in, the first thing he said was, get the FBI director on the phone, right here, Mr. President.
Yeah, there he is.
I want to bring Lazaro back in. What do you do on this day every year? Did being in that classroom change how the anniversaries, and especially this one, go for you?
So I really try to approach it in almost a humble way. If you're asking if there's any sort of ceremony or ritual that I participate in, not really. I do try to approach it as if it was any sort of other day. To me, obviously, as one of the students in that classroom, that's a little bit difficult to do. I'm always constantly reminded of that day, but it is always something that I do try to keep in the back of my mind, unless it's deliberately brought up, right? I'm never ashamed to be a part of that day, but it's tricky to have that, come up in any sort of organic conversation. But I do always like to take a quiet moment to myself, especially on these days, and sort of reflect, as is tradition across America.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
I'm told the Pentagon ceremony is underway. We should listen to a moment or two of that.
Oh, sing Amazing Grace.
We're back. We've been speaking with former White House Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush, Andy Card. Andy, I have a question about Flight 93. Our colleague Jeff Bennett Theron has been reporting on that commemoration that's where President Bush will be. I spoke to former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice last night. She said that the same story you tell, that the authority had been granted to the vice president. She was in the PIOC with him that day. to take down a passenger jet, and it was unclear at the moment whether that's what had happened.
It was not very long after President Bush spoke to Vice President Cheney and authorized, or at least confirmed the authorization for our fighter jet pilots to shoot down the commercial jetliners, that we learned Flight 93 had crashed in Shanksville. There were several of us on Air Force One that kind of wondered, was that one of our planes that did it? And we got an answer pretty quickly because of the FAA, but it was still haunting us, and it would have been a huge conscience challenge for us if it had been one of our pilots. And as the president said, I can't imagine receiving the order to do it. But gratefully, we can say there were some heroes on that flight that deserved the Medal of Honor. If they were wearing uniforms, they would have gotten it. But because they weren't wearing uniforms, they are national heroes because we declare them national heroes.
I have to say, at the risk of ruffling feathers in the aviation community, it would have been great to reroute air travel today. For about the third time, I have looked up.
I see you jump.
I understand we have Kennedy, we have LaGuardia, we have Newark, we have Teterboro, we have White Plains. But aircraft directly overhead and the noise they make in this cavern.
I mean, for months after 9/11, I was working in the White House. Seeing an airplane over DC was so haunting.
For years here, just
yeah, it is so quiet.
It
so
is
we hear it
hauntingly
sing.
quiet.
Yeah, it is
I
really.
I remember we were at Camp David right after 9/11, and all of a sudden we heard jets, and that's because they were our jets.
Right.
Keeping people away, and there was a small Piper Cub pilot was flying by, and the jets were on them and quickly, and that disrupted the quiet.
Yeah.
In DC, you usually have the
That's
noise, and it's silent.
Andy, I want to ask you about how the heroics of the day changed George W. Bush, because I think there are pictures of the president up, but I never heard the president talk about himself and what he did on 9/11. But I remember working on speeches even years later, and we'd have to take sections out because we knew he wouldn't get through them. He'd break down in tears. And one of those lines was about where the strength came from to do what people did that day. Talk about how the stories of that day changed him.
I think that he had resolve, and I think that he saw he had a greater purpose than he even thought he had when he took the oath of president. I think that having to respond to the terrorists the way he had to respond, knowing that we had to go to war, that he decided, I am going to be resolute and strong, and I want to be a leader that leads people with optimism during a difficult time. He was elected in such a controversial election. There were, as you know, entities that didn't even want to call him Mr. President.
Right.
That disappeared. And when we all took the label American, President Bush, I think, demonstrated that he could be our leader, and we were proud of it. He also worked very hard to build a coalition, and it was not an easy thing to do. He reached out to almost every world leader and invited them to be part of the solution. He actually commanded the world to other world leaders. You're either with us or against us. And you remember some leaders didn't want to be with us or against us. They wanted to be both. But he was filled with resolve. He had confidence. He had confidence in his team. You know, the folks who worked at the White House really rallied and did a great job. Even my secretary, Josephine Robinson, she was remarkable on 9/11, just responding. Linda Gambatiso, the director of White House operations, there were lots of people that did a great job pulling things together, and the president, I think, recognized that, empowered.
Moment of silence marked Flight 77, striking Pentagon at 9:37.
At the Pentagon to mark the moment of impact 20 years ago.
Plane taps.